The warning was on file before the ship ever sailed. In January 1987, British astrologer Dennis Elwell sat with his publisher, discussing how to promote his new book on cosmic influences. He left that meeting with an idea: use an upcoming total solar eclipse as a test case. Cast the charts, look for danger, then see if anyone would listen. Working from the eclipse of the 29th of March 1987, Elwell said he saw trouble at sea, disruption, loss, and what he later described as a Titanic-type disaster in the shipping world. He wrote unsolicited letters to two big operators, Cunard, which was relaunching the QE2, and P&O, which had recently acquired a cross-channel ferry called the Herald of Free Enterprise. The letters warned of a hazardous year for shipping and offered astrological help. Cunard declined. P&O replied politely that their emergency procedures had been designed to deal with the unexpected from whatever quarter. The correspondence was filed away. On the evening of the 6th of March 1987, 3 weeks before the eclipse, the Herald of Free Enterprise left Zeebrugge with her bow doors still open. Within minutes, seawater poured onto the car deck, and the ship rolled onto her side in shallow water. 193 passengers and crew died. In the aftermath, Elwell's warning letter resurfaced. Newspapers seized on the uncanny timing. Had an astrologer really foreseen one of Europe's worst peacetime maritime disasters only to be ignored? Tonight we open File 19-87. Written in the stars, can astrology really predict disaster? The pull of the planets. Astrology is older than most of the religions now practiced on Earth. For millennia, rulers kept court astrologers alongside generals and priests. Births, coronations, even military campaigns were timed to the sky. Modern science pushed astrology out of the universities, but not out of public life. Surveys in recent years suggest that around a quarter to a third of Americans believe the positions of the stars and planets influence human lives. A 2024 Harris poll reported that 70% of Americans hold at least some belief in astrology, even if many treat it as entertainment rather than a strict guide. Astrology has also slipped quietly into high office. After the 1981 assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, First Lady Nancy Reagan began consulting San Francisco astrologer Joan Quigley. For the next 7 years, Quigley's charts helped determine the president's schedule, press conferences, flights, even summit meetings with Mikhail Gorbachev, though the Reagans denied that policy itself was ever decided by the stars. In other words, belief in cosmic timing is not confined to tabloid horoscopes. It extends upward into boardrooms and cabinet rooms. That's what makes cases like Dennis Elwell's so unsettling. If astrology can genuinely warn of catastrophe, ignoring it looks reckless. If it cannot, relying on it looks worse. So which is it? The Herald, the eclipse, and the astrologer. Let's look closely at what Elwell actually did. In early 1987, he focused on the total solar eclipse due on the 29th of March. Eclipses have long been treated in astrology as triggers, moments when latent tensions in a chart are released. Elwell interpreted this one as dangerous for maritime affairs and wrote to Cunard and P&O to offer his services and caution them about the year ahead. P&O's reply, which later appeared in print, thanked him and declined, noting that procedures were in place to handle emergencies however caused. Within weeks, the Herald of Free Enterprise capsized, killing 193 people. Official inquiries blamed a culture of negligence and poor safety practices at the ferry operator. After the disaster, Elwell's letter became a minor media sensation. To his supporters, it looked like clear proof. The heavens had warned. The astrologer had spoken. The company had shrugged, and lives were lost. But when we examine the specifics, the picture blurs. Elwell did not name the Herald. He did not specify Zeebrucci, the date of the 6th of March, or the precise mechanism of failure. His warning spoke of an increased risk of shipping disasters over a broad window of time. In a world where ferries sail daily and shipping accidents, while rare, are not unknown, a wide prediction is easier to satisfy than a narrow one. We also have to consider visibility. The letters to Cunard and P and O are documented. The P and O reply survives in archives and press reproductions. But we do not have a ledger of all the other warnings that astrologers issued that year, which didn't coincide with catastrophe. Successful hits get amplified. Misses fade into silence. Elwell himself admitted, years later, that he saw the episode partly as an experiment to see how corporations would react if warned. They largely ignored him. When the Herald capsized, the coincidence became a story in its own right. So we have a detailed anecdote, backed by surviving correspondence. That's medium-strength evidence that one astrologer, at least once, made a strikingly relevant prediction. But a single case can't tell us whether astrology works in general. For that, we need to leave the newspaper headlines and enter the lab, when astrology meets physics. Before we test predictions statistically, we can ask a simpler question. How could astrology work? In their book, The Gemini Syndrome, astronomers Roger Culver and Philip Iana set out to evaluate astrology's physical claims. They noted that if planets and stars really shaped our personalities or destinies at birth, they ought to exert some measurable physical influence, gravitational, electromagnetic, or otherwise. The numbers are not kind. The gravitational pull of Mars on a newborn is far weaker than that of the obstetrician delivering the baby. The electromagnetic fields from distant planets are drowned out by local sources like hospital equipment. In other words, classical forces appear too small by orders of magnitude to do what traditional astrology claims. That doesn't disprove astrology, but it removes the most straightforward mechanism. Some astrologers respond by treating their art as symbolic rather than causal. The sky doesn't push events. It mirrors them. Others invoke speculative ideas about chaos theory or as yet unknown fields. But those positions move astrology out of testable physics and into metaphor. If there is no clear physical pathway, the burden shifts to performance. Does astrology produce accurate, specific information about people or events that can't be explained by chance, psychology, or general intuition? That question has been asked repeatedly. Double-blind charts and missing effects. In the 1980s, physicist Sean Carlson designed what many still regard as the most rigorous test of natal astrology. Working with astrologers nominated by the National Council for Geocosmic Research, he created a double-blind experiment. Astrologers were given birth charts and asked to match each one to the correct personality profile from a set of 3 based on standardized psychological tests. Neither astrologers nor subjects knew which charts belonged to whom during the matching. When the results were published in Nature in 1985, the outcome was blunt. Astrologers matched charts to personalities no better than chance. The pre-agreed central proposition of natal astrology, that a person's chart encodes their character in a way an expert can read, failed the test. Other studies have tried different approaches. So-called chart-matching experiments asked astrologers to pair full birth charts to biographical case files. Again, when the design was tight and double-blind, performance hovered around random guessing. Large-scale statistical work has searched for correlations between birth data and life outcomes, hospital admissions, personality traits. Some papers claim small effects. Others find none. When researchers pooled over 1,000 such studies in a 2022 review, their assessment was cautious. Whenever designs were robust and biases controlled, The alleged astrological signals tended to vanish or shrink to statistical noise. There is one exception that refuses to go quietly: the Mars effect, reported by French psychologist Michel Gauquelin. Gauquelin claimed that eminent athletes were disproportionately born when Mars was rising or culminating in the sky, a pattern that echoed traditional astrological rulerships. Subsequent attempts to confirm or refute this effect produced decades of controversy. Some replications seemed to find something. Others attributed it to biased data selection or statistical flukes. By today's standards, the Mars effect sits in a gray zone, intriguing, not definitively ruled out, but nowhere near the robust, repeatable signal that would rescue astrology as a whole. So from the standpoint of modern science, astrology's predictive performance looks weak. Well-designed experiments tend to yield null results. Partial anomalies exist, but they're contested and limited. That sets up a tension. If astrology largely fails under controlled conditions, how do we explain the vivid case files, the Dennis Elwells of the world, the presidential schedules seemingly steered by lunar cycles, psychology between the planets? One answer doesn't require any mysterious forces at all. Human beings are pattern-seeking machines. We remember the hits and forget the misses. A warning that lines up with a disaster becomes a story. A dozen warnings that do not line up become clutter. This is confirmation bias in action. Astrological language is also flexible. A single configuration might be read as disruption, structural weakness, or sudden change, phrases that can be mapped onto many different real-world events after the fact. It's like reading a weather forecast that says conditions are unstable, and then claiming success whether a thunderstorm, a cold snap, or a strong breeze eventually appears. At the personal level, astrologers often work as counselors. Psychologists suggest that people find generalized statements about themselves surprisingly accurate, a phenomenon known as the Barnum effect. When an astrologer describes you as independent yet craving connection, it feels specific but applies to almost everyone. In therapeutic settings, the chart can become a structured prompt for introspection, much like a Rorschach test. That doesn't mean astrology is useless. It means its value may lie more in meaning-making than in prediction. Consider Nancy Reagan. After a near-fatal attack on her husband, she looked for any tool that might restore a sense of control. Joan Quigley's charts provided that, a timetable that transformed random danger into a schedule of safer and riskier days. Whether or not the planets were truly shaping events, the system gave the First Lady enough confidence to let the motorcades roll. In that sense, astrology functioned like a psychological safety device. The question is whether we should mistake that comfort for evidence of cosmic causation. The problem of predicting markets. Astrology's advocates sometimes argue that even if personality readings are vague, the stars can still flag major collective events, wars, revolutions, market crashes. Financial astrology in particular has boomed, offering charts for indices, commodities, even cryptocurrencies. Here, too, the data are sobering. Academic tests of astrological strategies in stock markets have generally found no consistent advantage. One study examining whether a company's sun sign affected its returns concluded that the effect was not economically meaningful. Another paper sliced decades of factor returns by zodiac year and found that while some signs appeared to have higher averages, the differences vanished under proper statistical tests. Economists point out a hard constraint. If a simple, publicly known rule, whether based on price patterns or planetary cycles, really did predict markets reliably, powerful traders would exploit it until the edge disappeared. In an efficient or even semi-efficient market, Astrology should not be able to beat the competition for long. And yet financial astrology persists because markets feel chaotic and impersonal. It is easier to face volatility when you can blame Saturn than when you must accept that millions of decisions, none under your control, are jostling the price. Two readings of the same sky. So where does that leave the Herald of Free Enterprise and the broader claim that astrology can predict disaster? On one reading, Elwell's story is exactly what it looks like. A striking, if imperfect, hit. The eclipse chart showed maritime danger. The astrologer issued written warnings to relevant companies. One of those companies lost a ship and 193 lives. No scientist can currently explain how planetary positions could encode such information, but perhaps, like magnetism in the 13th century, we are simply missing the mechanism. If that's true, astrology might conceivably function like a primitive weather map. Meteorologists do not cause storms. They interpret patterns in air pressure and temperature to forecast them. Elwell himself likened his work to that kind of pattern recognition. Maybe in some way we do not yet understand, the solar system carries a second set of contours, symbolic pressure systems, that skilled practitioners can learn to read. The other reading is more prosaic and more uncomfortable. From this perspective, Elwell's case is an example of how broad warnings, issued often enough, will occasionally line up with major events. The letters to Cunard and P and O gained significance only because the Herald sank. If nothing had happened, they would be forgotten. The lack of specific details, no ship's name, no date, no mechanical cause, makes it easier to fit the prediction to the outcome. Meanwhile, when astrologers are asked to perform under controlled conditions, matching charts to personalities, or predicting outcomes in advance, they tend to do no better than chance. The elegant narrative of the Herald stands against a backdrop of thousands of failed or untestable claims. On this reading, astrology is a rich, symbolic language that humans use to impose meaning on random events, not a cosmic early warning system. Both interpretations face problems. The first must explain why astrology falters in the lab and why proposed mechanisms conflict with well-established physics. The second must explain why intelligent, educated people, including presidents, scientists, and skeptics turned semi-believers, continue to find the system personally compelling, and why a handful of statistical anomalies like the Mars effect refuse to disappear entirely. What we can say with confidence is limited. Most large-scale tests do not support astrology's claims to objective predictive power, but stories like Dennis Elwell's show how hard it is to separate coincidence, intuition, and genuine anomaly, especially once human memory and publicity get involved. The sky above us is predictable to an almost absurd degree. The orbits of planets can be calculated centuries in advance. The lives below are anything but. Between those two realities, astrology stretches a web of meaning, part calendar, part myth, part coping mechanism. Whether that web ever catches real, testable glimpses of the future remains an open file, because every mystery hides a truth.